Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all yet again for tuning in. We should have another great show ahead of you on this lovely Tuesday afternoon here in New Jersey. Wherever you're from, welcome to this show. Love having your support. But to kind of go through what's going to happen today, we are going to recap last night's game between the Saints and the Chiefs, a Chiefs win. We're looking at the waiver wire in terms of next week in fantasy football. We're going to be giving you some updates on the NFL MVP odds. Like last episode, we dissected the Heisman odds. Today we're going to dissect the MVP odds, and then I'm going to begin my positional rankings for Week 6 with my QBs and running backs. But before we get into any of that good stuff, I do want to remind you to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. It is a greatly appreciative thing to do for the show and the network, especially me and my fellow podcasters as well, doing our thing. Go check them out as well. Go follow us on social media, but also most importantly, if you want to contribute directly to this show during its duration, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They're a great way to interact with the show. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything at all you want to leave in my comments section, you can do it in many ways. You can leave $1 tip or donation, and it will immediately pop up, and I will read it out loud on the screen, your opinion, your thoughts. They're a great way to make the show even better than it already is, and I greatly appreciate it in advance. Without further ado, let's jump right into today's show. And let us begin with our first segment of the day, just recapping a kind of pedestrian Monday Night Football game between the New Orleans Saints and the Kansas City Chiefs. Easy Chiefs victory, 26-13 in their favor. But it wasn't necessarily a quote-unquote classic Chiefs victory. It felt very humdrum, nothing too extraordinary about this game, nothing too exciting. Only one big play, like I said, it came from Rashid Shaheed on the Saints side of things, but overall, a very good win. Comprehensive win, most importantly, for the Chiefs going forward, and it proves that even without Rashee Rice, in his absence, they are still a good team that is looking to contend for that third Super Bowl in a row. Let's talk about this game from a fantasy perspective, because there were really no huge performances. There was a surprise performance on the Chiefs side of things, but there weren't many performances that made you say, wow, I think this player over the next couple of weeks is going to grow as a fantasy player and can be someone I can rely upon. It wasn't necessarily anything of that nature, but there were solid performances nonetheless from both sides, actually, not just the Chiefs. For the Saints, this game truly puts them in the danger zone. I think that if you're a Saints fan, you should be proper panicking, not just because Derek Carr went down, because not everyone got involved in this game. Alvin Kamara looked ineffective. Chris Olave only had, 10 yards in this game? It's just a very disappointing game if you're a Saints fan, and a very disappointing game if you have Saints players in your fantasy squad as well. But let's go over the positives here, because there were a couple. Let's start with Patrick Mahomes. By his standards, this was a very pedestrian game. 28 of 39 yards, 28 of 39 passing, 331 yards. But he had no touchdowns, and he had one interception in the red zone, mind you. And it was his play in the red zone that was kind of concerning. He did try and perform out of structure, but it wasn't working, and that's something that they have to address moving forward and fix, because you can't just always be kicking field goals in the red zone if you're the Chiefs. You got to put points on the board and put touchdowns into the end zone, put players into the end zone, most importantly. So they have to find a formula quickly, because Patrick Mahomes did not necessarily look like himself in the red zone. Only 13.44 fantasy points, but ultimately the reason why I still trust Patrick Mahomes as a fantasy player is because this is a situation that he's been in before, and it's not necessarily, concerning to see him struggle in the red zone if, Andy Reid feels like it can be fixed. I feel like that's where they are right now, that they kind of look like they hit a little bit of a wall, but still have potential to score, because they still had touchdowns and nice drives put together. But it's just a matter of making them so that A, they're sustainable, but B, they find the end zone as well. That's not necessarily Mahomes' fault. It's just the nature of how this offense is figuring itself out again. But overall, pretty solid, not necessarily extraordinary game for a guy of Patrick Mahomes' stature. But then let's go to the surprising factors of this Chiefs offense. We talked about them a little bit yesterday. I have to shout out a loyal fan of this show, loyal commenter of this show, Andre, for saying that Kareem Hunt would have a big game. I was a little bit apprehensive, a little bit skeptical about Kareem Hunt and his fit in this Chiefs offense, but he proved me wrong because I really thought the Chiefs felt like they could rotate the receivers in and out of the game as they always do, and Patrick Mahomes would just dink and dunk on the field, chip away at the Saints defense. But no, Kareem Hunt had 27 carries in this game. That's a large amount of carries for a player like Kareem Hunt, who's more so known for his ability to kind of wear defenses down and not known for the explosive play. But that's exactly what he did. He wore the Saints defense down, and in that way, they were able to sustain drives for longer than, if Patrick Mahomes just tried to chip away at the Saints defense. Because while that worked to some degree for Patrick Mahomes, it didn't necessarily equate to touchdown drives. It kind of stalled out in the red zone, and thus they didn't put up as many points as they could have. If Kareem Hunt had gotten the ball, say 35 times, perhaps we're looking at a bigger margin of victory for Kansas City here. 27 carries, though, for 102 yards and 1 touchdown for Kareem Hunt, for a total of 18.7 fantasy points. I think he is someone who could potentially be a waiver wire pick, and we'll talk about some other backup options at the running back position in my waiver wire segment. But for the most part, I feel like Kareem Hunt, at least is showing the Chiefs that he can be someone who they can rely upon in certain situations. Because let's say the Chiefs are going to be a little bit more stagnant in the red zone. They're going to have to find ways to fix that and find ways to overcome those situations. So Kareem Hunt could be a huge part of that. And if not, then at the very least, he's someone who can allow Patrick Mahomes to be comfortable in terms of how heavy the rotation of wide receivers can be. Because if Mahomes doesn't trust the receivers out there, that's one thing. But it's quite another when, they can't necessarily generate anything. So at least, if Mahomes' dink and dunk chip away approach gets him into the red zone, then you can have Kareem Hunt to kind of finish the job. And so it alleviates some of the burden on Mahomes, and it also varies the Chiefs' offense enough to not make it too one-dimensional. So Kareem Hunt, that's a very notable fantasy performance for him if you're looking for someone as a kind of backup option at the running back position. Then the big surprise of the night on the Chiefs side of things, how about Juju Smith-Schuster? 7 receptions, 130 yards for a grand total of 20 fantasy points. Not a bad day at the office for Mr. Smith-Schuster. And he's someone who, like I said, is going to have to step up. And not for nothing, he is familiar with this Chiefs offense to some degree because he was there a couple of years ago, helped them in their Super Bowl run against the Eagles, and ultimately, was one of those receivers who isn't necessarily anything special, but is a great complementary piece to what this offense is trying to do. If, say, Xavier Worthy is going to be the guy who's either going to be your gadget play guy who's going on end arounds, who's trying to get deep shots into the end zone, maybe draw some penalties like we saw last night. And Travis Kelce's just going to be the reliable guy who just finds the soft spot in the coverage, exploits it as always, and Mahomes will try and find him. Then Juju can just be the guy who just has to get open. Because if Worthy's going deep, it draws attention to him. And if Kelce, is just trying to be his Kelce self, using his IQ to get open, then that's positive as well because he can find the soft spot. But then you have to account for Juju Smith-Schuster because while he's not, most special route runner, the most special speed guy, he combines those traits pretty well so that he can be effective when, both those options are limited. So therefore, this performance, I don't necessarily think in a fantasy perspective and fantasy terms, it was something worthwhile, because now I feel like the Chiefs have diagnosed their issues, and it's not just going to be, one guy carrying the load. I feel like Juju, it's nice for him to have this game, but he's not going to put up this number consistently. So I like this performance from him, but I want to see it in another capacity. But overall, it was a decent performance and a decent showing from a Chiefs offense that we really didn't know what to expect when they stepped out there. And they truly put on a performance that made me say, okay, the Chiefs still have it. On the Saints side of things, very worrying. Alarm bells should be ringing in New Orleans right now. Not just because, like I said, of the Derek Carr injury. Because that's one factor. It's just because this offense did not click at all. Steve Spagnuolo had this offense in the palm of his hand. He controlled it at his will. He was blitzing. He was dropping players in coverage. He was incredible in his play calling tonight. But I have to shout out both Derek Carr and Rashid Shaheed there. They tried their best. Derek Carr, 18-28, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Rashid Shaheed, 4 catches, 86 yards, 1 touchdown for a grand total of 18.6 fantasy points. But at the end of the day, this Saints offense had no rhyme or reason. Like I said, they tried to take the deep shot like I knew they would to Rashid Shaheed, but the Chiefs had that cover. They tried to get Kamara going in both the run and receiving game. Didn't go anywhere. Chris Olave, like I said, only had 10 yards. So my big question is, where do the Saints go from here? They can't really take away anything from this game except for the fact that they might be looking at Derek Carr sitting out for an extended period of time and having to rely on rookie Jake Haener as their backup. But at the end of the day, the thing about the Saints is that if you look at their offense, right, it can be successful like we saw it in weeks 1 and 2. But now, I feel like the problem is it's getting a little bit too anticipatory. It's not necessarily reactionary like it was. Like Derek Carr picking and choosing what he wanted to do, and Alvin Kamara just getting involved very heavily in this game. It's not, like seeing and diagnosing defensive coverages and picking them apart at will. This was more timid, kind of too safe of an approach for this game, and it didn't work out. But kudos to Rashid Shaheed for getting that one deep shot like I expected him to, but overall this wasn't necessarily the best offensive game plan for the New Orleans Saints. But going forward, I'm more worried about Derek Carr and how his injury could affect this team. But let me know what you think in the comments, because it was a very kind of comprehensive yet uninspired, not necessarily uninspiring, but not necessarily, the biggest, best win that Chiefs could have possibly had this week. But let me know what you think in the comments. But coming up on the other side of things, we're going to be taking a look around the waiver wire, taking some look at the hidden gems that you guys might want to find out there. We'll be right back after this short break, so don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined throughout the show, if you want to leave a burning question, comment, or concern concerning the show, you can make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube too. Leave a comment. It's a great way to interact with the show. You can do it with all the shows here at the network, not just mine. But if you have any opinion throughout the show that you want to share, I'll be glad to read it out loud on the show because it's all about you guys. I want to hear your opinions about these segments, whether or not you like them or not, whether or not you just want to mention your own fantasy team as well. I'm all ears, so let's make this show even bigger and better. But without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of today's show, taking a little look around the waiver wire. Now we're deeper into the NFL season. Now we're getting more understanding of certain offenses, and thus we're getting a certain understanding of whether or not, these guys are just quote-unquote injury replacements that we may have seen over the past couple of weeks, or these are true bona fide breakout candidates for this season. And the players I compiled all fit into that same category of potential breakout stars. One of them is a quote-unquote injury replacement for now. Maybe not even an injury replacement for that long, but I still like him a lot from what I've seen of him. And so, when I look at this list, this isn't necessarily, the most comprehensive list you can find in the waiver wire, because there's still guys out there who I'm surprised by, and you might be surprised by, who you might believe actually are true stars in fantasy. These, though, are guys that have the potential to be, but I just need to see more out of, and are just kind of advising you to look out for and monitor on the waiver wire. So without further ado, let's mention some names. This first name is very painful for me to mention as a Seahawks fan, as he gashed us on the ground this past week to the tune of over 100 yards. And that is Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. Now, not for nothing, I think that the Giants' running game was not as threatening as we wanted it to be, right? Or people expected it to be, or Giants fans in general, because of the fact that Devin Singletary was not someone who was ultimately appealing as someone to supplement Daniel Jones in the backfield, but he was there, and they picked him up, and there was like, okay, maybe this can work. But through the first couple of games, a lot of fumbles, a lot of miscommunication perhaps in the backfield, and he wasn't really effective. So in this game against Seattle, right, where they knew even though Seattle was banged up, their backs were up against it in a very tough environment to play, they had a game plan. Kudos to them, actually, as a Seattle fan. Kudos for them for sticking to their game plan and having it work to great effect. Their game plan was take advantage of Seattle's very, very, very weak, almost atrocious run defense, gash on the ground, and then take advantage of their man coverage and exploit it to the tune of Daniel Jones throwing the ball deep, which he hadn't done to great effect over the past couple of weeks, and ultimately earn the victory. So, say the Giants feel as if Tyrone Tracy can be their secret weapon. Then it's all going to depend on how, week by week, matchups-wise, you feel the Giants can make that strategy work, much like they did against Seattle. This week, they're going up against Cincinnati, another very weak defense, especially in the run game. So, this can either be a trend for Tracy in their next couple of games, or it can be a little bit of a blip, because the Giants are a team that are still finding their footing offensively, I feel. That game plan might not necessarily work against certain teams, especially as they get deeper into the year, especially as they get into divisional games, right? So, Tracy is a great name to know, but he's someone who, at this current moment in time, I still want to see more out of. But he's going to be an interesting option out there in the waiver wire, should he still stay out there and not be picked up for a couple of weeks. Then another backup running back that I think is for real this time, Jeremy McNichols. Maybe a name unfamiliar to most, even to me, at the start of the season, but he's for real in this Commanders backfield. And when I think about this Commanders backfield, right, they don't have the biggest job. They don't have the biggest task of most on the Washington Commanders offense. But when they do, they're very effective in their planning, right? Because they have a very deep running back room. They have Eckler. Obviously, he's been battling a couple injuries this season, had the concussion against Cincy. Hope he has a speedy recovery and that he can be a big piece of this running back room yet again. But even Brian Robinson Jr., who a lot of people thought was going to be the starter, has been fantastic this season. But then we look to Nichols, who's had decent games these past couple of weeks and really has emerged as potential star in this Commanders offense. And yes, a big part of the Commanders' success is that they don't run the ball as often as you want a team, even with a rookie quarterback, to run the football. But when they do run, it's with intention and for the plan. They feel like they have a plan for every single one of their running backs where they can get them effective yardage, use them and utilize their strengths, most importantly, to the greatest effects, and ultimately get them into the end zone. So that one makes a guy like McNichols so intriguing, because you have to weigh the fact that Jaden Daniels is controlling this offense more than we thought, and he's going to want to throw the football more than we expected of him. But in the opportunities these running backs get, especially a guy like McNichols, who is more so a red zone back than anything else, then that's where opportunity could arise. I'm not saying, that he has to get 10 to 15 carries to warrant, say, a flex spot on your team week by week. He just has to continue being himself in this Commanders offense and not necessarily, get too high or get too low about the number of touches he receives, and he should be fine because he's good for what he is, and that is a red zone back who can get you touchdowns and points in quick fashion. But right now, I feel like the reason a lot of people won't necessarily go for him is because of the fact the Commanders are a pass-heavy offense. But potentially they're going to have to change as the season goes on and they face tougher teams, so who knows how much more reps Jeremy McNichols could get in this offense. And another guy, another backup running back, Roschon Johnson. He also is someone much like McNichols who doesn't get much yardage but gets a lot of touchdowns. We saw him get 2 touchdowns in their last game against Carolina. And he's someone who is more workmanlike in nature. He's not, going to be, a guy like DeAndre Swift who he's backing up in that he can get the occasional explosive play. No. At Texas, he was very supplementary in that way, and now for Chicago, he's going to remain that way. He's never going to be a quote-unquote star running back, but like Jeremy McNichols, he's good for what he is. And Chicago, not for nothing, has been struggling in the run game. So there could be more of a balance there, if they want to try Johnson out as a kind of chunk yardage player at the running back position. Because DeAndre Swift, yes, he's been getting better, but he still hasn't reached or eclipsed 100 yards just yet, I believe, just solely on the ground. So that's something to monitor as well. If they want to change a pace, then Roschon Johnson is an interesting guy. And from a fantasy perspective, he could get a lot of touchdowns if they see him as an asset in the red zone rather than just in open space, just trying to open up the running game that way. So Roschon Johnson's a name that I feel like you need to know going forward as well. And then another guy. This guy is kind of more puzzling to me because he fits the role of someone who I could see being an RB1 on a good team, but he has that kind of backup nature in him in that he is more valued in the red zone than, say, a normal RB1, but he was an RB1 before, so he has that propensity to have that balance of chunk yardage player and big play ability. So Cam Akers is someone who I feel very weird about putting here because, like we said, at Los Angeles, he was an RB1 kind of type, and he was very effective there. But in the Houston Texans system, he's used a bit differently because Joe Mixon, for the most part, has been very impressive for them at the running back position, getting a lot more touches than I expected, to be honest, from him out of the running back position there. But when Cam Akers comes in, he is someone who can alter the game in a way that slows it down and speeds it up kind of hand in hand. And not for nothing, the Texans should project to become more of a run-heavy team, even with Collins out and even with Collins in. Because I feel like C.J. Stroud is seeing the game a bit too quick right now, in that he is still able to make the big plays, but he's not calm enough. And I think that he needs a 2 running back system to calm him down a little bit, keep him composed, and keep his mind focused on the task at hand. And so Cam Akers could be very effective in that regard, and in supplementing and complementing what C.J. Stroud's best assets are. The final one is the injury replacement, and the wide receiver, the first one on this list, Daryl Hodge. We don't necessarily know the extent of the Drake London injury, but I still like what Hodge can bring to this offense. If they're going to be a very short yardage offense, like we saw against the Bucs, when on that final drive, Kirk was very effective in the short to intermediate areas of the field and for the game outright, then that's what we're going to have to see from him. But for now, Daryl Hodge is someone who is on the periphery of a guy you want to pick up, say, in desperation, but also a guy who you might shy away from because he is a quote-unquote injury replacement. Let me know what you think in the comments, because it is going to get a little bit more weird and wacky as the year goes on in the waiver wire. But on the other side of things, I'm going to give you an update on the NFL MVP odds. We did the Heisman odds yesterday, and we're now doing the NFL MVP odds. Beware. These were from before the games were played, so you may have a different opinion of this than odds makers in Vegas, but I will give them to you ever the same. We'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Our third segment today, we're going to take a little bit of a break from fantasy talk and get into more betting advice, specifically looking at the NFL MVP odds. We looked at the Heisman odds yesterday, and now we're looking at the volatility of the NFL MVP odds. Like I said before the break, beware of the fact that this is a list that I got before games were played, so you may not agree with them. Let me know what you think in the comments, but this is what the odds makers in Vegas had on Saturday afternoon at the latest. Without further ado, let's jump right into those rankings. We're only doing the top 5 here, so if you want anyone from outside the top 5 to be talked about, I will gladly talk about them as well, but these are the 5 that Vegas had in mind. Starting off at number 5, we have Lamar Jackson, who a lot of people might say is the favorite right now. And he just had 2 of the best games against 2 of the better teams, I'll say, in the AFC, the Bills and the Bengals. And he did it in such a way that truly says he's the focal point of the Ravens offense. I know it's funny to say because Derrick Henry is complimenting him very well, much better than even I expected, exceeding all my expectations of him. But it just highlights the importance of what Lamar can do as well. Because my fear about what the Baltimore Ravens offense could become stemmed from the fact that Derrick Henry is not a prototypical Baltimore Ravens running back, so to speak, in my opinion. He was going to be more of a workhorse back and not someone like a Gus Edwards or a J.K. Dobbins, who you had to account for in terms of their explosiveness and also have to worry about Lamar Jackson's explosiveness in design runs for him or RPOs or things of that nature. But it worked perfectly. So this is more a kind of singing of Lamar Jackson's praises than it is an indictment of Derrick Henry, if you get what I'm saying. Because Derrick Henry is just as vital to this Baltimore Ravens offense and its sustainability, but it just makes Lamar Jackson look even better because he's able to work with not just guys like Gus Edwards, and it proves this. He's not just able to work with guys like Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, but he's able to work with a guy who is more of a workhorse back. Yes, he still has the speed. He's still proven that, but he is, in my opinion, a guy who's more workmanlike in the way he goes about the running back position. Which just shows that Lamar Jackson can work with anyone. And that would make him my personal MVP favorite. But at plus 1,000 as of Saturday. So who knows, the line could have moved and he could right now be the favorite. And I would have no qualms about that at all. Let me know what you think about his situation in the comments. But as of right now, he would be my personal pick. If the season ended today, he would win the NFL MVP award. Because he has just proven to be such a vital player to the Baltimore Ravens year in, year out. But number 4, the surprise candidate. A guy who might fade, as my dad, as a Vikings fan, might say. He's going to turn back into a pumpkin at midnight eventually, but here he is at the current moment, number 4 in the MVP odds according to Vegas, Sam Darnold. And we can't say he doesn't deserve it. He is at plus 1,100 in terms of, FanDuel's, so you might be wondering why is he number 4. He has lower odds across more betting books, so to speak, in terms of that. So at 4 he sits, and the thing about Sam Darnold and his shock MVP candidacy is that it doesn't feel like a shock, if Kevin O'Connell continues to trust him. And that's what's going to determine how real this candidacy is going forward. We saw in London kind of him slowing down a little bit. Kind of looking a little bit like the old Sam Darnold. And it may have been a case of him going abroad and the body clock adjustment and all those things. But it is kind of worrying that, Vikings fans are anticipating a fall off for Sam Darnold. Until I see it, I'm going to expect that he will continue with his trajectory and continue this kind of ascendancy into an MVP candidate on the Minnesota Vikings. But the caveat is that it is still Sam Darnold. And I feel like, yes, the Vikings offense, the very best is complementary, and the very best has the weapons that Sam Darnold needs to recover, but the story has also been the Vikings defense. We can't forget about what the Vikings defense means to their success. I think it means more than what Sam Darnold is doing with this offense. Kudos to Sam Darnold for, being the league leader in touchdown passes. Really listening and trusting Kevin O'Connell. But right now, I kind of feel like Sam Darnold, as Shep Easy Sweet Spot says, without Aaron Jones, he's got no shot. That's good to mention as well because, Aaron Jones was a big part of that offense, and now, like Shep Easy Sweet Spot alluded to, he has gone down with injury, which I had forgotten about. But at the end of the day, it was all about, the Vikings defense. That was the more impressive storyline. Kudos to Brian Flores for that. But we'll have to see, if Sam Darnold is for real. And if he is, then maybe this 4 spot is warranted. But he does have, as Sheppy's Sweeper says, luckily A. Jones' injury looks mild, but you never know. He is getting back Hawkinson potentially in a couple of weeks, so maybe that will, mitigate for that. But I think that ultimately, if you were to say, well, Sam Darnold is an out-and-out top 3 MVP candidate, I would have no qualms with that at this current moment in time. But this goes to show that week in, week out, things can change. But at the number 3 position is a guy who, in CJ Stroud, really defines the kind of the middle of the pack here in this MVP race. Because I feel like we should be expecting bigger things out of CJ Stroud and, for that matter, the Texans offense. But I also feel like they made moves with the acquisitions of Joe Mixon and Cam Akers to make it feel as if CJ Stroud should not have all the pressure on his shoulders. And it's showing in their style of play a little bit. They still have the big weapon, big shots that they like to take on this side of the offense. As Chevy Sweeper says, oh yeah, Hawk's on the way. Like I said, that could be a huge factor in whether or not we see Sam Darnold potentially move up into the top 3. And I think he might already be in the top 3. And the thing with Stroud, at plus 1100 as well, is that he is someone who I feel can be figured out easily, but it's just a matter of this offensive setup functioning the way he wants it to be, because he's a big part of keeping it on schedule. But there's also the silver lining that they have this belief in the Texans' culture, in the Texans' identity, in the Texans' way, that any style of play can win them a football game. And it has rung true to some extent this season. And so, for all intents and purposes, I feel like CJ Stroud is an excellent MVP candidate, and he deserves all the plaudits he's been receiving up to this point in his career. But it feels like I want to see more of him. It feels like I want him to be someone who's proactive in figuring out why he has certain deficiencies. Because if he does that, and if he's able to understand why games like the Vikings game happened, then he'll become a much better player. And not for nothing, even with the loss of some of his weapons, like Nico Collins went down, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the week, I feel like what CJ Stroud can do is really hone in on, okay, week in, week out, the offense could look different. It's just a matter of fact. But what I can mean to it can affect how this game plays out. And we saw the stinker against the Vikings. And we saw that he couldn't necessarily close out both the Jags and the Bills, even winning the Bills game when he had a big lead. But at the end of the day, I still trust him to stay in this MVP race because of the fact he does have that aura about him that makes him feel like someone who is willing to mature. And we've seen him mature in some areas where other quarterbacks may have faltered in their maturation. But right now, I just feel like there's a wall between him and these top 2 guys that's kind of blocking me and perhaps you and other people out there off from saying, well, CJ Stroud deservedly should be in this race. But the top 2 as well, very controversial. Number 2, Josh Allen. I still think, he deserves to be in this MVP race because he's Josh Allen and his highs are very high. But then, of course, you have to remember the fact that Josh Allen is not the perfect quarterback who we think he is. He is still someone who has the propensity to make boneheaded plays week in, week out. And over the past couple of weeks, he's looked less than the sum of his parts. And now we're starting to see perhaps what the absence of Stephon Diggs could be doing to him. And the absence of Khalil Shakir, at least not fully healthy Khalil Shakir. So, Josh Allen at plus 275 is someone who voters fall in love with and people tend to fall in love with, but you have to understand his flaws as well. He has his peaks, he has his valleys, and you have to take the lumps, and you have to accept that that is what he is. And if Joe Brady can get him back on track, and he limits his turnovers, then of course he's still back in this race. But until that seed of doubt in my mind is completely gone, where I can say that Josh Allen, week in, week out, is going to have a sterling game, compete to the best of his abilities, and most importantly, play mistake-free football, then I can't really say he's a favorite. in the MVP race. I can say he's firmly in the discussion, but I can't say he's ultimately going to win it. Then, this next guy, the guy at number 1, as of Saturday, mind you, is another guy who, even though we know what he's capable of, still isn't playing to the best of his abilities either, and that is Patrick Mahomes. Very weird how Vegas kind of skews the narrative here in terms of the betting odds. Because all of these players, very popular players, very popular, except for Sam Darnold, of course, because no one expected that. But when I look at how Vegas views this, I don't feel as if Mahomes should be number 1, but because of his brand, because of the name, and because of the fact that he's chasing this three-peat destiny, even without Rashee Rice now, I feel like he should be the favorite, surprisingly. A plus 210, why not Mahomes? Because he has the most unique opportunity of any of these candidates to do what nobody's done before. And that is to win 3 Super Bowls in a row. Yes, it's a regular season MVP award, and his regular season has been rough to this point. But you have to consider the fact that right now, Mahomes is someone who just feels like he's ready to rip off like 4, 5, 6 good games. And we can't put it past him to do it because we know the Chiefs are capable of. Last night wasn't their best offensive performance, but we saw inklings of what they could be without Rashee Rice. And it looks like it could be a scary proposition. So if Mahomes is the center point of that, then look out, because he looks like an MVP candidate should he fully be on board to getting this Chiefs offense back on track. Let me know what you think in the comments. Very interesting MVP race. Maybe not as interesting as the Heisman race, but certainly one that I wanted to update you on. But coming up on the other side of things, I begin my positional rankings for the upcoming Week 6 of the NFL season. We'll be right back to talk about the QBs after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for this fourth segment, we're going to begin, like I said before the break, our positional rankings. Starting off with our QB position as always. And this week could tell us a lot about some MVP candidates and some breakout stars at the QB position in fantasy. A lot of, not necessarily movement, but a lot of interesting storylines for certain QBs that I picked. And the 4 guys I picked, yes, the majority of them are stars, you would say. Majority of them are also fantastic fantasy players as well. But there's a reason why some of these rankings include guys who you might not have picked or might not want to pick for this week, because it's an opportunity for them to prove themselves in a matchups-oriented space. Because week in, week out, these guys are not, quote-unquote, the best quarterbacks in the league. Some of them aren't. But you have to consider that fantasy is a matchups game. And that's what I love about these QB, running back, whatever position player I bring up, rankings. That's what I love about them. Without further ado, let's talk about my top 4 fantasy QB picks for this week. Let's start with, of course, the guy we just talked about, or one of the guys we just talked about in the MVP race. My personal pick for MVP, and that is Lamar Jackson, going up against the Commanders defense that had a pretty impressive performance, had 2 pretty impressive performances over the past couple of weeks, albeit against not the greatest offenses. But Lamar, like I said, he's proven to be a different animal with Derrick Henry in the backfield. And against the Commanders defense that, while it's improving, can still be picked apart, Lamar Jackson's going to take advantage. both in the run game and the pass game. In the run game, I feel like we're going to see a lot more of RPOs, read option plays from this Baltimore Ravens offense. You can exploit both the linebackers of Washington with Derrick Henry and how he frustrates you and puts you in a bind, and then you just have to account for Lamar's speed if he takes it himself. So they're going to try and find ways to really beat up those Washington linebackers. And then, in terms of the passing game, Lamar's proven that he's willing to take risks in the passing as well. And there's no better secondary to take risks against than the Commanders. I'm not saying that they're the weakest, quote-unquote, secondary, but they're one that certainly has had their issues in both man and zone coverage. And Baltimore has been finding ways to account for their offensive line woes in terms of Lamar's improvisation, in terms of adding that second tight end to block. And so we see the way that Lamar can attack in the pass game. Some games he's on about it, and some games he wants to attack defenses through the pass, and sometimes he wants to hand it off to Derrick Henry, have him be the bell cow for the offense. But this game certainly feels like it can go both ways, and to great result, because Washington can be exploited in many different ways, and we saw it with Cincinnati, and we saw it, with Tampa as well. So I kind of feel like this is the week where, Lamar really puts this Commanders defense to the test in a way that they haven't really seen before. So Lamar is my overall pick. Not for nothing, he just came off perhaps his best fantasy performance of the season with 33.42 points against Cincinnati. My second guy, coming off a bye week, Jared Goff, going up against the Cowboys. And I feel like Jared Goff coming off this bye week, and if you look beyond that, coming off perhaps his best game of the season against Seattle, a perfect game for him. I feel like this was the perfect time for Jared Goff to have a bye week. Some might say otherwise because, after coming off a big performance, you kind of want to go into another game and be like, I want to do this again and again and again. But having this bye week really kind of settles this offense down, gets it fully healthy, mind you. I don't think everyone in that game against Seattle was fully healthy. Sam Laporta might have been playing at 50% or maybe 60% for him. But right now, this Detroit Lions offense has to like where it is. Yes, you can talk about the excuses that people make for Seattle's defense in that game, but nobody, let's be honest, looked like stopping the Lions in that game. And they will be unstoppable and will continue to be unstoppable if you can't stop their two running backs and you can't account for, both Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams in the passing game. Because they just have so many different ways to beat you, the Lions. And as long as Jared Goff stays calm and composed in the system, he'll be all right. And he proved that he was all right against Seattle. We just have to see it against a better defense. And the Cowboys, not for nothing, did look better against, the Steelers. Yes, it was the Steelers. And we're going to talk about them as Tapton says Goff is interesting and Williams becoming a target magnet. I completely agree. This offense goes as Goff and his receivers go. And, if you can get them into third and long situations, kudos to you. But it's going to be very difficult with those receivers like Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams, who just look so good as a vertical threat in this offense. But Jared Goff is just always someone who you have to monitor, because he's not, as Tapton says, O-line stout too. I feel the same way as well. Lions are just an offensive juggernaut back to front. So it's going to be very difficult not to pick Jared Goff in certain weeks, but he is still a very versatile player and volatile player. So you have to monitor him. But the next guy I want to talk about is Justin Fields. He's not, the sexiest option as a QB1 or 2, but he's getting the job done for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game against the Cowboys, yes, you kind of feel like he could have done more with what he had and the possessions he had, and he only had 131 yards in this game and 2 touchdowns. But as long as he keeps the ball safe, that's the best way to continue improving himself. He had a couple of instances in that game against Dallas where he turned the ball over, or looked like turning the ball over, but he is someone who is a very safe option. And going up against the Raiders, who right now are a big question mark in my mind, I feel like he can find different ways to make his team relax. And that's what I want to see out of the Steelers. A relaxed approach on the offensive side of the ball. You don't want to get too fancy because you're finding ways to stay in football games with this style of offense. And most importantly, you're getting improvement from Justin Fields. Because let's say Justin Fields has the job for the entire year and they don't turn to Russell Wilson, which I don't want them to do because Justin Fields has looked pretty good. Justin Fields could technically be your QB of the future. He's only, 25 years old? So, keeping him calm and poised in the system is very important to how Pittsburgh wants to develop its offensive game plan. Because, who knows, in a couple of years, maybe Justin Fields will be comfortable, not just, being an option kind of quarterback. And he's comfortable taking deep shots. We see it this season. Potentially, Justin Fields is someone you monitor this year. In a couple of years down the road, if he's still starting for Pittsburgh, then you can pick him up. He can even be a popular pick in a dynasty league because he's certainly not playing in a way that's detrimental to his team, and he's certainly not playing in a way that will make you think, well, Pittsburgh should get rid of him immediately. I feel like he's played himself into a starting gig somewhere, maybe not Pittsburgh, but maybe Pittsburgh. But he really is someone who can warrant inclusion in the system. So he's just someone that I want to mention here, maybe as a matchups guy, week in, week out. But the last guy I want to mention is Joe Burrow against the Giants. Maybe not as much of a gimme game as I thought, because as a Seattle fan, I thought this was a gimme game, and we blew it. But Joe Burrow had his best game of the season against the Baltimore Ravens. And I feel like, as much as I want to say the Bengals are out of it, they have an easy slate of games coming up where Joe Burrow can feast. They're up against the Giants, winnable game. At least I think so. The Browns. So you have a couple of games coming up where you can get to 3-4, and you might be looking at a potential little late run. But it's ultimately all about the defense as well, so it can't be all about Joe Burrow because of the fact, you would love to get in shootouts because it proves that you can hang with anybody. But your defense has to at least look competent in what they do. And right now they don't. They might just be the worst unit in the entire NFL. So we're going to have to see how they play out. But Joe Burrow, for the very most part, is still going to be a fantastic fantasy QB. But let me know what you think in the comments. But for our last segment here on today's show, we transition to the running back position, perhaps the most volatile in all of fantasy sports. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that, to conclude our show. Hello everyone and welcome back into the last segment of today's edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network, and we are continuing our positional rankings, like I said, with the running back position. The most exciting, most volatile in fantasy sports, perhaps. And I feel like this week's grouping, I have one guy who ended up being injured. Remember, folks, I do predict before the games even begin based off of matchups, seeing the matchups ahead of the schedule for different weeks. So I could not have predicted this guy's injury. I'm going to say it's Jonathan Taylor. Hope he has a speedy recovery. But the three guys that it did end up picking, all guys who are finding their footing or have already proven their worth. As Splash Bro says, running backs earning some respect through first 5 games, in my opinion. Not necessarily the biggest names either. And as we're going to see on this list, all of these guys can be seen to be quote-unquote high-end running backs. They are either in Tier 1, at least one of them is, or you can say Tier 2 or 3. And those are the guys who would say, okay, I would love to have as either my RB1 or RB2. There are still guys out there, like Splash Bros alluded to, who are not big names, who can get you fantasy points. So overall, the running back position, really fun to kind of diagnose and analyze in that manner. But without further ado, let's jump right into the 3 running backs. Unfortunately, Jonathan Taylor is not among them. And like I said, hope he has a speedy recovery because he's a fascinating player to watch week in and week out. But these are the 3 guys that I have. And one of them, to start off with, is on my personal fantasy team and has really found a resurgence in this Bears offense. That is DeAndre Swift. Now, he still hasn't eclipsed 100 yards rushing on the ground just yet. But he has proven to be very integral with what the Bears have been building over there. I feel like the game against the Panthers was their best game as a collective unit with Caleb Williams leading the way at the QB position. But a big part of what I want them to continue to do is try and find ways for DeAndre Swift to help Caleb Williams bolster his best traits. Because we all know Caleb Williams can throw the ball a country mile. But we don't think that he should because of the fact, they need balance. And that's not what we saw for the first couple of weeks of the season, at least for the first 3 weeks. But the past 2 weeks, they found a happy medium, at the very least, where Caleb Williams is starting to find favorite targets in DJ Moore, who's also on my fantasy team, so go figure. But also finding a way to utilize DeAndre Swift in the run game to great effect and in the pass game as well. And so DeAndre Johnson, as you can see, 20 fantasy points against Carolina, going up against the Jags, who still, despite finding their first win, are kind of a disaster right now. I feel like they're going to have another big game that sees another very balanced offensive game plan from the Bears. And it just goes to show it takes a few weeks to mature a little bit for offenses that are trying to find their footing with a rookie QB like Caleb Williams. So overall, DeAndre Swift is a name that I would monitor if you want to start him. I specifically will not shy away from him if this is what he looks like for the rest of the season. As my RB2, he's someone who I greatly appreciate as well. So he's someone who I feel doesn't get a lot of attention, but should these next coming weeks. The next guy is an obvious one. Derrick Henry. I feel like it's kind of taboo to include 2 players from the same team in my positional rankings, but they're just that good. And I just feel like the time has been coming with Commanders' defense to face a team that they simply can't keep up with. As good as their offense has looked for the past couple of weeks, and I would still respect them if they lost this game handily. No doubt in my mind. I still respect Washington for what they've done to start the year with Jaden Daniels. But you got to shore up that defense. Because Cliff Kingsbury's been doing an excellent job as the OC. But Dan Quinn was hired, I believe, to kind of bolster the defensive side of the football. That's what he's known for. That's what he's known for throughout his career, whether it be at Seattle and Atlanta. He is known for bolstering the defenses, and he's got to find some kind of rhythm with it. Because Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are such a unique QB running back tandem that you got to find ways to generate pressure or to have your corners hold up in coverage, because they will pick you apart at will if you can't do that. And Derrick Henry's going to be a big part of the game plan, because this feels like a game where he's not going to be, speedy Derrick Henry. He's going to be workhorse, wear you down, get physical with you, Derrick Henry. And it's not going to be fun for this defense and the Commanders if that happens. He only had 6 fantasy points with the Cincinnati Bengals, but as like I said, Josh Jacobs, low-key horse, not exploding but lurking. I kind of agree. I feel like Josh Jacobs definitely could have ended up on this list. I feel like, the Packers' running attack is highly underrated because they have so many weapons in the pass game and a lot of variety and diversity to their offense. But Josh Jacobs is someone who, week in, week out, could produce for you. But again, matchups are what's going to be important here for running backs. You have to get matchups. And with DeAndre Swift and Derrick Henry, it feels like a no-brainer going up against two defenses who, have, had decent games. But I just feel like the time is coming for players such as Swift and Henry to really bring them back down to earth. And so that's why I feel like Derrick Henry is someone who, week in, week out, even with a 16.6. I just didn't see it in the graphic that I even put up there. 16.6 point performance against Cincinnati. Even in those kind of quote-unquote down games for him, that Derrick Henry's going to be excellent for you. And so that's why he's there. But a guy that I'm picking for my last fantasy running back on my list, also want to buy, but someone who I feel like people aren't respecting as much because it's not just the system that he's in that's making his abilities work. It's the fact that we're still waiting for the inevitable to happen to this guy. I still feel like a lot of people are tense about how this player profiles, especially in the past, but you can't ignore the fact he's been one of the more impressive running backs in the National Football League over the past couple of weeks, and that is J.K. Dobbins. Like I said, the offensive philosophy makes it so that J.K. Dobbins under Jim Harbaugh is the workhorse in this offense. He is the guy, the center point, the focal point of this offense. But the reason why I feel like a lot of people, like I said, are treating him as kind of a wild card is because of the injury history. It's still there. You still have to recognize it. You still have to respect that fact about him. And so I feel like a lot of people aren't attuned to what he's done this season. Because this season, I feel like, yes, there's more chance to get an injury, more chance to sustain an injury, and have him sit out an extended period of time, and for the Chargers to, have no answers at the running back position. I feel like J.K. Dobbins is such an X factor in this division now. Because let's say he remains fully healthy. I feel like that's something to kind of hold on to in the Chargers. That you have someone at the running back position that can make Jim Harbaugh's plan work. Because if you didn't, then that would spell chaos for an offense that is getting used to this new system. But let's say J.K. Dobbins goes down, then a lot of value is not just lost in real life. It's also lost in fantasy. Because in some ways, J.K. Dobbins is helping the reputation of the Chargers as a fantasy team. If he wasn't there, guys like Quentin Johnston, guys like, say, Ladd McConkey wouldn't be as highly valued. And yet, I'm getting comments about players like Johnston and Ladd McConkey. People glad to have those players on their team. Even though, J.K. Dobbins is the focal point of this team. So, I'm saying, if you're a J.K. Dobbins owner, you should respect him and value him wholeheartedly. Because he really makes this Chargers offense tick. He really is unlike any player in the NFL in that the offense is so integral to his success. Because if he's not successful, if he's not on the field, guys like Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey, and even Justin Herbert to some extent, their values heavily decrease, if you get what I'm saying. So J.K. Dobbins going up against the Broncos defense that is going to be a tough nut to crack. Over the past couple of weeks, they've been very incredible in what they've been able to do against the Jets and the Raiders. But it's a defense that you're going to have to find a way to do it. And if anyone feels like they can at least think of something to slow them down and have an offensive game plan that can keep the Chargers in control, it's J.K. Dobbins and Jim Harbaugh. And I'll give them a lot of credit if they win this game because of J.K. Dobbins and also because of the timeliness of, how Justin Herbert, Quentin Johnston, and Ladd McConkey supplement him. The Chargers are a team that is now becoming a team that I really like in fantasy. And J.K. Dobbins is to thank. But let me know what you think in the comments. That will just about do it for the show. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I have been Chris Shepard. Thank you all for watching. But before we leave for today, I want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network if you so choose. It's greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters. Another great way if you want to interact with shows directly, not just mine. You can use the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. On any show, you can click the $sign, your comment will appear, and I will read it out loud. Great way to interact. But before it's all done, 3:30 p.m. Eastern will be the time for tomorrow. As always, I'm out. Thank you all for watching.